Welcome back to Lecture 4 for this course on the Diamond Sutra. And I'm Geri Larkin, and I'm happy to have company as I move through this sutra. So here's where we are now. We're sitting next to Subhuti, and up until now we've been kind of bathed in Hinduism. Our culture is a culture where we've admired ascetics, and we've admired people who have really given up everything. But somehow we find ourselves sitting there with Subhuti, who's now asked this character, who's been teaching for some 35 years, well, how do you be a bodhisattva? How do you be a bodhisattva? And Buddha has started to slice through just about everything that Subhuti and you and I at this point have all not only believed to be true, but experienced as true. And he becomes increasingly fearless during this sutra. Not that he had any fear at all by this point, Buddha, but boy, he just is starting to slice away. And it really starts to happen here in chapter 9. So what I'll do today is read chapters 9 through 12. I was like 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, that's those 4. And then I'll unpack them a little bit. I have some things that I want to say about them. And then focus in on 4 themes. And then we'll be done. All right, so 9. Tell me, Subhuti, do those who find the river think, I have attained the goal of finding the river? Subhuti replied, no, indeed, Bhagavan. Those who find the river do not think, I have attained the goal of finding the river. And why not? Bhagavan, they do not find any such dharma. Thus they are said to find the river. They do not find a sight, nor do they find a sound, a smell, a taste, a touch, or a dharma. Thus they are said to find the river. Bhagavan, if those who found the river should think, I have attained the goal of finding the river, they would be attached to a self. They would be attached to a being, a life, and a soul. The Buddha said, tell me, Subhuti, do those who return once more think I have attained the goal of returning once more? Subhuti replied, no, indeed, Bhagavan. Those who return once more do not think I have attained the goal of returning once more. And why not? Bhagavan, they do not find any such dharma as returning once more. Thus they are said to return once more. The Buddha said, tell me, Subhuti, do those who return no more think I have attained the goal of returning no more? Subhuti replied, no, indeed, Bhagavan. Those who return no more do not think I have attained the goal of returning no more. And why not? Bhagavan, they do not find any such dharma as returning no more. Thus they are said to return no more. The Buddha said, tell me, Subhuti, do those who are free from rebirth think, I have attained freedom from rebirth? Subhuti replied, I feel like we could all say this together now. No, indeed, Bhagavan. Those who are free from rebirth do not think, I have attained freedom from rebirth. And why not? Bhagavan, there is no such dharma as freedom from rebirth. Thus are they said to be free from rebirth. If Bhagavan, those who are free from rebirth should think, I have attained freedom from rebirth, they would be attached to a self. They would be attached to a being, a life, and a soul. And how so? Bhagavan, the Tathagata, the Arhan, the fully enlightened one, has declared that I am foremost among those who dwell free of passion. Bhagavan, although I am free from rebirth and without desires, I do not think I am free from rebirth and without desires. Bhagavan, if I thought I have attained freedom from rebirth, the Tathagata would not have singled me out by saying, foremost among those who dwell free of passion is the noble son Subhuti, for he dwells nowhere at all. Thus is he called one who dwells free of passion, who dwells free of passion. Poor Subhuti. He sets himself up here. 10. The Buddha said, Subhuti, what do you think? Did the Tathagata obtain any such dharma in the presence of Dipankara Tathagata, the Arhan, the fully enlightened one? Subhuti replied, "No, indeed, Bhagavan. The Tathagata did not obtain any such dharma in the presence of Dipankara Tathagata, the Arhan, the fully enlightened one." The Buddha said, "Subhuti, if any bodhisattva should thus claim, 'I shall bring about the transformation of a world,' such a claim would be untrue." "And how so?" "The transformation of a world, Subhuti, the transformation of a world, is said by the Tathagata to be no transformation. Thus it is called the transformation of a world. Therefore, Subhuti, fearless bodhisattvas should thus give birth to a thought that is not attached, and not give birth to a thought attached to anything. They should not give birth to a thought attached to a sight, nor should they give birth to a thought attached to a sound, a smell, a taste, a touch, or a dharma." Subhuti, imagine a person with an immense perfect body whose self-existence is like that of Mount Sumeru. What do you think, Subhuti? Would such self-existence be great? Subhuti replied, "Great indeed, Bhagavan. Such self-existence would be great, Sugata." "And why?" "Because self-existence, Bhagavan, self-existence is said by the Tathagata to be no existence. Thus it is called self-existence, because, Bhagavan, it is neither existence nor no existence. Thus it is called self-existence." 11. The Buddha said, "Subhuti, what do you think? If there were as many rivers as there are grains of sand in the great river of the Ganges, would the number of grains of sand in all those rivers be great?" Subhuti replied, "The number of rivers would be great, Bhagavan. How much more so their grains of sand?" The Buddha said, "I shall tell you, Subhuti, so you shall know. If a man or woman filled as many worlds as there are grains of sand in all those rivers with the 7 jewels, and gave them as a gift to the Tathagatas, the Arhans, the fully enlightened ones, what do you think, Subhuti? Would the body of merit produced as a result by that man or woman be great?" Subhuti replied, "It would be great, Bhagavan, great. Indeed, Sugata. The body of merit produced as a result by that man or woman would be immeasurable and infinite." The Buddha said, "Subhuti, if then a man or woman filled as many worlds as that with the 7 jewels and gave them as a gift to the Tathagatas, the Arhants, the fully enlightened ones, and a noble son or daughter grasped but one 4-line gata of this Dharma teaching and made it known and explained to others, the body of merit produced as a result would be immeasurably, infinitely greater." 12. Furthermore, Subhuti, wherever but one 4-line gata of this Dharma teaching is spoken or explained, that place is like a stupa in the world of devas, humans, and asuras. How much more shall they be remarkably blessed, Subhuti, who memorize, recite, and master this entire teaching, and explain it in detail to others. For in that place, Subhuti, dwells a teacher and one who represents the Guru of wisdom. So if that isn't motivation enough to memorize this sutra and then tattoo it all over your body, I don't know what is. So here we have Buddha's going for the juggler. And he takes on all sorts of things here in this part of the sutra. And Subhuti is paying close attention to him, and at the same time is being used a little bit as a straight man as we go through this teaching, especially in this middle part. And it's for our benefit, because Subhuti here is Subhuti who is known to be this great, monk with great dispassion, and he just can't help but brag about it a little bit in the sutra. And he's come out of this tradition where people are determined to measure how mature their spirituality is by whether they have, how many rebirths they have, have they gotten to just one birth left and things like that. And he set himself up here because Buddha is absolutely slicing through all these things. And because he just, again, is being such a wonderful grandmother, he can't even leave the merit thing alone. He has to circle back around again at the end of these 4 chapters to say, and oh, by the way, you can give, all the jewels that are equivalent to all of the sands and all of the rivers in all of time and space, and it doesn't even come close to somebody who really grasps this teaching. And so here we are kind of caught, because we have to give up all of the things. If we're sitting there next to Subhuti as one of these students, we have to give up everything we've known and strived for and used to lean in on and to trust, to be able to really feel. It's not even about understanding, to actually feel this teaching that we're moving through. So some quick comments about that. There are lots of clues of what has to be let go of as we go through this. And the fearlessness that is part of the Diamond Sutra is that Buddha won't let us cheat, in the sense that we have to really let go of everything. And he defines that. We have to let go of self. Subhuti says it. We have to let go of our being. So not just ourself, how we identify ourselves, but our being, right? Of our life. Who wants to do that? And then, just in case we're believers, of our soul. So right there in the very beginning of this section, he's saying, oh, by the way, all of those things that you even kind of marginally cling to have to go. And then he kind of leads in and says, even if we get to a point where we only have one human life left, so we've really done a lot of work here to let go of these things, and we're able to sit in emptiness, and we're able to go through at least most of a retreat without too much whining. We're still plagued with disturbed thinking, which again is defined. So even at that point, which is humbling all by itself, even at the point where we are sure we have only one human life left, we're still plagued with the deluded thinking that comes from greed, anger, delusion, and my 2 favorites, pride and doubt. And what's interesting about those is when we look at this honestly ourselves, we can see how the levels go up and down according to what's going on in our lives. But it takes great courage, and that's part of what this definition of the Bodhisattva is, that Buddha's giving us, to really look at that and look at what's going on inside of ourselves, not somebody else, but really inside of each of us. And by now, I'm sure each of you have heard about greed, anger, delusion ad nauseum. But here in this particular sutra, I was very touched when I first saw this identification of both pride and doubt as well. So even then, so that's when we still have one life left to live. When we get to the point of returning no more, which means we've basically cut off greed, anger, and a lot of delusion, we've cut off wrong practice, we've probably cut off a lot of doubt, and hopefully at least some pride. What we still have even then are these kleshas, these kind of leftover themes, if you will, or leftover tastes of things that need to be fleshed out, or need to just kind of be able to disappear, if you will, over time. And the not so good news about that is, when we really think about it, that could take kalpas. So the forbearance of really deciding to be a full participant on this path is big F forbearance. Think about how much Buddha is really asking of Subhuti, and therefore of us, as he's teaching here. So Buddha goes through these levels of the Arhan's tradition, and at the very end he talks about how even with the Arhan tradition, he doesn't say anything negative about it, except to say, there's something that needs to happen beyond this. And it's interesting because it's almost like a surprise twist to the story. Basically what he teaches here is that when Arhans are incapable of further rebirths, what that means is, where's the Bodhisattva part isn't possible. Without coming back into the world, how is it that we are able to be there for the world? And that's huge. That is absolutely huge. I can only imagine what it was like for the first people who actually studied this sutra, their reaction to this teaching. So then Buddha comes back in chapter 10 and he's saying, don't get caught up in anything. Don't for sure try to add up all the attainments, the 10 attainments I have by 2012, 2013. And really look at ourselves and why it is we're on this path. Because if we're on this path to wake up, the real difference between what Buddha calls nirvana and enlightenment is the difference between this arhantship, in his words, and the bodhisattva way. And that's just a huge, huge teaching that comes in this part of this sutra. And then he goes into this whole story of Dipankara. The Buddhist story with Dipankara is actually a great story. So if you have access to any of the old sutras or even the dictionary that I mentioned in the first class, it's kind of fun to read about what Buddha had to put up with in his own path here, so that when you and I are cranky because we have to change places in the monastery with somebody, or we don't get what we thought we were going to get for breakfast, we can kind of say, well, at least I didn't have to go through that, at least not that I remember. Okay. At the same time, Buddha gives a lot of coaching here in this part of this sutra. He talks a little bit about people who are truly cultivating. And what's interesting there, we need to not be overzealous. I know for a lot of us, and I just would talk about me here, when we first get a taste of this path, it's just we fall in love with it and want to do everything correctly. I know for me, I went from, when I first started practicing Buddhism, I was so thrilled by it that, all the things I'd been saving up for, the trips I wanted to take, I put into robes, and I had to buy a Buddha, and I think I had more beads on my body for 5 years than I've ever had in the rest of my life altogether. There was just no way anybody could know I wasn't a full-fledged Buddhist. If I could have worn them as a halo around my head, I would have. Looking back, it's hilarious. I feel like, oh my gosh, every day was Halloween. What are you being for Halloween? I'm being a Buddhist. So there's this issue about being overzealous here. And Buddha's not asking people to be overzealous. He's asking us to cultivate. And again, to go back, if we're confused by this, he started the sutra by demonstrating how we can cultivate without being overzealous. It's very, very clear. It's very clear. But the other side of it is to not be lazy or remiss or not thinking about this enough, because in the kind of being remiss on this, there's a sloppiness that is really kind of a diluted sloppiness. So we don't want that either. And that's where all these teachings about mindfulness in all of the sutras show up to hold us up as we try to figure out where is this place, where is this kind of perfect point where we're cultivating without being too zealous or without being too thoughtless or too deluded on this path. And that's a real forbearance. So then we have this whole section where Buddha talks about the world being transformed. And it's wonderful because he catches us again, how is the world transformed? The world is not transformed by anything external that we can see. What's going on here? And I love that because it reminds me of, I don't remember how I was first introduced to this. It's kind of a funny little question, how do you cover the earth with leather so people don't harm their feet? And, so a lot of times when you first hear it, you think, well, how would I cover the earth with leather? And all of a sudden you're like, oh, yeah, I'd wear a pair of sandals. It's that kind of a trick teaching, I'll call it. At the same time, one of the mistakes a lot of us make when we read these sutras, especially the teachings that come out of the early Pali tradition, I think what we have a tendency to do is not see the compassion in the teachings. And there's great, great compassion in all of these. Buddha is never saying anywhere to let go of the compassion that's a part of this. He does talk a lot about non-attachment, but non-attachment does not mean no compassion. I think we make a mistake sometimes. We try to have them both mean the same thing. So then he ends up, and this will happen a couple of times, or happens a couple of times in the sutra with the, oh, by the way, let me just remind you, all the merit that you can get from all these grains of sand, don't begin to compare to somebody who actually brings this teaching into his or her body mind. And when we do that, then we become stupas. I mean, we literally become stupas. And teaching and explain it is kind of an interesting phrase for me, because when I first read this sutra, I thought, oh, I didn't know you were supposed to be a Buddhist and then go teach Buddhism. I mean, here this is pretty funny, me sitting here talking to all of you. But teaching has as much to do with how we are in the world and how we respond to situations as anything else. The world is transformed by how you and I react to what happens in our lives. It's not transformed by anything else. It's literally transformed moment by moment. So really what this sutra is all about is Buddha coaching you and I through these teachings of not just emptiness, but moving us through these stages, all the stages through arhanship, into this emptiness, kind of pushing us at the paramitas until we've kind of incorporated into our very lives this great wisdom that's the transformation of the world. And it's fun. As long as we don't take ourselves seriously, it can be a riot. Once we take ourselves seriously, it's all over. Okay. So with that, I have 4 things I want to just mention, and then we'll take a break until the next lecture. The first theme that I wanted to introduce with this lecture is this kind of universal impulse to worship something. And why does that matter? And at least for me, these particular chapters of the Diamond Sutra are Buddha's demonstrating how we get into trouble when we worship something, anything, whether we're worshiping what level we're at, whether we're worshiping, how things are done in this temple. Because once we worship something, what we tend to do, I mean, I watch myself with politics every once in a while because I come from a family of people who are very active politically. Once we have an opinion about something or an understanding of something, we want to defend it. And we'll defend it even when we hear ourselves being extreme just because we want to make a point. And when we worship something, it becomes even stronger. It's even more so. And so it's a very useful exercise to quietly think about what it is that I worship. What is it that you worship? Do you worship goodness? Do you worship common sense? Do you worship the teachings? What is it that we worship? Because when we look behind the worshiping, we'll see a clinging. And that can give us all kinds of clues to the kleshes, if you will, or the knots that you and I really need to look at carefully to figure out how these knots are harming. One of the things that I wrestled with a lot when I was at Still Point was that there was one student in particular who was incredibly bright. I mean, he knew everything. He knew the sutras cold. He was really a marvelous, marvelous student. And what came with that was a need to correct. And it was very, very difficult for him to have anything happen at Still Point that wasn't completely correct and completely accurate. And I remember thinking how hard it was for him to be with the rest of us who were only human and making mistakes as we went along. But looking back now, years later, what I'm actually more sad about thinking about him is that he didn't get the juiciness of the teachings. He didn't get the kind of the robustness of these teachings and didn't get to see how this need to be correct really blocked a lot of the compassion that Buddha's really trying to teach Subhuti about. So this matters. So this universal need to worship. So just to think about that a little bit. Then the second theme that I wanted to just mention again, I already talked about earlier in one of the early lectures, was this whole diamond metaphor, and to bring it up again to say the diamonds are just a great metaphor here because they fool us. We they're see-through, they don't look like they're strong, but then they turn out to be the hardest thing ever. They shine light all over, they reflect light, and light is such a wonderful kind of image for this whole teaching. But mostly what they reflect is what is. They reflect truth. Diamonds don't reflect something that isn't there. And that's huge. That's huge. Let's see if there's anything else I want to say about that. I think, diamonds speak for themselves. Two more things here to look at. One is the role of Subhuti. While Sariputra, what I wrote to myself, while Sariputra was foremost in wisdom, Subhuti was foremost in this great samadhi of dispassion, in that he wasn't really upset at this point when he was interacting with Buddha by anything. But what I love about this sutra is you can feel the change in Subhuti as we move through the sutra, kind of this growing wisdom in him and this growing compassion. So that while it's true that he's playing this role of a straight man sidekick, he's also being you and me. He's also playing the role of our trying to interact with the Buddha for us, really trying to understand what's going on here. And it's just a huge, huge gift. And part of what's huge about it is that he's wise enough at this point to really be fearless about demonstrating his own thinking and being willing to let go of his own understanding of how this path works or how this path plays out for the sake of the rest of us. So one of the great ironies of this sutra as we move through it is that we realize that not only is Buddha, cracking us wide open, but so is Subhuti. That they're both, in a way, kind of positioning us to have this great experience of not just understanding how things are and what our roles really are here, but that they give us over and over again these tastes of great compassion. And I don't know about you, but around here we're already saying, what do you think, Subhuti, about just about everything? You want to go to the movies? What do you think, Subhuti? What do you want for breakfast? Well, I don't know, Subhuti. All right. The last thing that I want to mention is the paramitas, because that will be the question to answer, the homework question for this week. The paramitas, I'm sure you've all had some taste of the paramitas. The paramitas are the perfections. They're called the perfections. And what I love about the paramitas is that they take us beyond the precepts. So the precepts become these guidelines for how we can live our lives. But the paramitas for me are almost like throwing oil on the fire of this great practice that you and I find ourselves doing. And you know them, but I'll mention them: charity, morality, forbearance, vigor, meditation, and wisdom. And the Diamond Sutra has many examples of all of these. And what's wonderful about the sutra is it actually starts out, so here's your great hint for homework this week, starts out manifesting. Buddha literally manifests each of these paramitas straight out when this sutra begins. And so for your homework assignment, I'm going to ask you to go back into the sutra and find specific examples, at least one, of each of the paramitas in the Diamond Sutra. So just to give you an example of how this might play out, one example of charity could be Buddha's picking up his begging bowl and going to beg. But when you think about charity and use this example, what I'd like you to think about a little bit more deeply is, where's the charity here? I mean, what is the charity? Is the charity the people giving the food to Buddha? Is the charity Buddha going out with a begging bowl to give people that opportunity? How does charity play out in this specific example? Because it's actually really wonderful when we look at these, how not just secular they are, but how they take up the whole world. I think that's about everything I want to say this week. I want to end with a quote from the Vimalakirti Sutra. Who would purify their world first purifies their mind. As mind becomes pure, world becomes pure. And this actually is the work of the Paramitas. All right, until next time, thank you.